So, do you feel like obviously part of what precipitated the current demonstrations was, a fire with a devastating death toll in a sense that was partly a result of lockdown. We've talked a lot about how cultures have changed throughout the pandemic, certainly here in the U.S. Do you get the sense that there is that level of change, or are we likely to see the kinds of crackdowns you mentioned in the past around protests of any form, whether it's, the Uyghurs or going all the way back to Tiananmen Square? What do you anticipate this time? Is there any sense that the voice of the people is going to make a difference?
Well, I think, people have been protesting on issue because of issues concerning pollution, labor rights violations, women's rights. But this time, I think people are really connecting the COVID restrictions with the political system. China was successful in containing the virus at the beginning of the pandemic, but now this similar measures are being instituted at a time that the broader context has changed. Omicron isn't as threatening as the previous variants, and this zero COVID policy is still being carried out in an abusive way that is not based on science. People know why we're still having these policies because of the political system. This one man in Beijing decides the entire country should be under this sort of restrictions. It's because we don't have a democratic process. We don't have, people's opinions and how they feel about the policies are not factored into the government's decision making. And also the experts' opinions are not factored into the government's decision making. And this is a flaw of this political system. So people are connecting dots. So I think this does feel different. Also, the zero COVID policy affects everyone in China.
Yeah.
In the past, the protests are usually limited to a certain location. But now, this protests across the country.
I one other question I had, Yaqiu, is that you alluded to Deng Xiaoping and of course, the Tiananmen Square. I'd love to put Xi Jinping in the context of how different a leader he is for China right now relative to the many other leaders that we've seen, maybe not many other, but the leaders that we've seen up to that point. We've heard about the Uyghurs, in Western China, the Muslim minority. How much more restrictive is it now than it was, even a decade plus ago? Just to give some context for those who don't track it as closely as you do.
Well, I think, when the internet was introduced to China and people felt, the internet was going to change the country. But the government has perfected the censorship. And right now, people can enjoy the entertainment on the internet. The internet provides, as people in the US do. But at the same time, they don't get the information we do here get. And also, the government also utilized the internet to do better own propaganda.
Yeah.
Besides that, I think one big thing that has really changed is the government's surveillance capabilities. 10 years ago, the government, no governments have the technology to survey people the way, today governments can do. And China is at the very forefront of government surveillance. So I think those things really, empowered the government to control people even more so than 10 years ago or 40 years ago. And again, and the second part is that the global context has changed. 40 years ago, China was a relatively small country in the economic sense, but now China is the world's second largest economy, and there's a different level of confidence. Deng Xiaoping was about opening to the West, learn from the West, but now I don't think Xi Jinping feels that there's anything to learn from the West.
So you are not optimistic, I take it. Do you feel safe going back yourself?
Well, I have a Chinese passport, so it's my legal right? So, but I know there are things would deter me from going back to China. And I wouldn't want to go into details, but I'm very cautious of the risks.
And any other advice you give as to how to assess what's going on right now? Because it does feel more widespread. We're hearing language we have not heard before here in the West with regard to very personal language about Xi Jinping. Do you think that this could mark a turning point, or do you really feel this too shall pass from what you've seen?
I don't know. I mean, this is so personal to me, and I feel, I really feel so inspired by people, because it's really risky to go out to the street, just say, Xi Jinping down, right? And I really want to see people's rights to be respected, and then people win after paying such a price. But at the same time, I understand that the system's control over the Chinese society is very solid, and they have the tools, and they have the technologies, and also the militaries to control the country. So I don't know. I think I want to say is that I support our young people's demand, and whatever they decided to do to have their rights respected.